and otherwise, to shift the trajectory of where my path would have taken me. And because of that, everything changed. And I know, and I never forgot that. I know what it is to have a second chance, or maybe this was a third chance, but to have somebody say, I'm going to go to bat for you and give you an opportunity, and through education. And if I hadn't gotten the education that I got, I wouldn't have been able to develop. I mean, people can certainly develop critical thinking skills without formal education. There's no question about it. In fact, some people could argue that you're more likely to develop good critical thinking skills without formal education, because our education system doesn't always cultivate critical thinking skills. Sometimes it does the opposite. But it certainly is a way. It is a way forward for a lot of people.
Welcome to the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. My name is Lee Davey. I am not an alcoholic. I refuse to be anonymous. I'm someone that doesn't drink alcohol, and I spend every waking moment of the day helping other people do the same, like right now, this very minute, this very second, where I'm going to be talking to Melanie Joy, Dr. Melanie Joy. But before we get there, I want to say a beautiful, wonderful Strive welcome to Polly, Nicola, and Damien. Damien's arrived from Chicago. Nicola's come from Manchester. You mad for it, Nicola? And Polly has come from Edinburgh in Scotland. Now, here is a fact. The first person I ever helped become a striver was Corinne McGowan, and she lived in Glasgow in Scotland. Probably get that wrong, but Glasgow in Scotland. And since I helped Corinne become someone who doesn't drink alcohol, about a decade ago now, Polly is the second person from Scotland to join Strive. So that is amazing. It's also incredible when you consider how much alcohol people in Scotland drink and how much of a problem alcoholism is in Scotland. So if you're listening to this and you're from Scotland, what are you doing? Get your ass over to 1000 Days Sober and let us help you stop drinking that shit so you can get your life back in order, okay? So there's Polly, Nicola, and Damien. They've all just recently joined Strive, and they're currently on the forum getting used to people. They're on the WhatsApp groups, and really just, feeling their way in to this wonderful family of ours. The other thing that Polly and Nicola and Damien are about to do is on February the 16th, they're going to form part of the pioneering group who are going to take on the first ever 1000 Day Sober Challenge. They are going to experience the full might of the Strive model for change. And on February 16th, they embark on our first phase, which is the stuck phase. And then the second phase, which is the thought phase. So the stuck phase is for people who have no clue that alcohol is a problem for them. They do not know that alcohol is an issue. They think that drinking it is normal. They think that drinking it is absolutely pleasurable. It's like the most pleasurable thing ever. And if you mention that they might have a problem with alcohol, they'll probably take your head off with a meat cleaver. And you will all know people who are in the stuck phase. None of you are, because you're listening to a podcast called the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. So you're likely in the thought phase, where you're starting to think, I wonder if drinking this powerful drug, one of the five most addictive substances in the world, which makes me shit and puke blood, is really that good for me. I'm not quite sure. That is the thought phase, okay? So we're going to take Polly, Nicola, Damien, and the rest of the Strive posse through those two phases for the next 3 months, starting on September the 16th, to really go through that ambivalence and to understand it. And at the end of that 3 months, we'll be saying to Polly, Nicola, Damien, and the rest of the gang, who's ready to make a change? Who's ready to move forward into the research phase, the initiative phase, the vigilance phase, and the enlightenment phase to really become 1000 Days Sober, to become a striver, to stop drinking alcohol, live a fulfilled life, and build rockets and go to Mars. Who wants to do that? And for those who are not ready for that, those who don't want to do that yet, they just stay where they are in the stuck and the thought phases, being ambivalent about alcohol and trying to figure things out. And that's really important. It's important that this experience at 1000 Days Sober is a human-based system, and it's not a system-based system. System-based system? That doesn't even make any sense. But I hope you know what I'm on about. I want to meet people where they are in their addiction cycle and not create something that they're not even ready to take on. Because we all know the resistance or Chucky or Wolfie or whatever you call it in your mind is always dragging you back to drink alcohol, okay? The wine witch, as our previous guest on the Alcohol Addiction podcast, Janie Lee Grace, calls it. That voice that says, no, Lee is full of shit. He doesn't know what he's talking about. When he says that alcoholism is an invisible, violent, dominant belief system, he is quite clearly off his rocker. Don't listen to that guy. What does he know? He's just a 20-year railwayman who writes poker articles, for God's sake. That voice gets super, super loud if I don't meet you where you're at. Okay, so really important. They're about to embark on that journey on February 16th. And if you want to join them, you'd better send me an email by the end of this week, because come Saturday night, I'm shutting the door, I'm barring it. I'm not letting anybody else back into Strive until April the 1st. Also, right now, this experience, this wonderful, amazing, life-changing experience is only £40 a month, and you can cancel whenever you like. Come April the 1st, that price might change. Everything might change. This is the pioneering group. This is the group that's going to get full access to everything for £40 a month. So if you're quick, get on board now. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait until April. Okay? All right. Now, without further ado, and email me at thetruthaboutalcohol@gmail.com. Okay? Without further ado, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of my guest. Her name is Melanie Joy. She is a Harvard-educated psychologist, an international speaker, an organizational and relationship coach. She's the author of 4 books, including the award-winning Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows. Actually, I think she's the author of 5 books, actually. The books that I've read is Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows. I've read Beyond Beliefs, which is an incredible book about relationships. I've read Powerarchies, which is an integral part of the Strive sobriety system and about oppression. Really fantastic. And I've actually been fortunate enough to read her new book, Getting Relationships Right, which is not even out in the stores yet. And it's another wonderful book on relationships, right? So she is an amazing author. Her ideas and philosophies are really woven deep into my theory on alcoholism being an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system. An actual saying that I got off Melanie. You know, that Melanie used it to describe Carnism, the act of belief system that eating meat is acceptable, and I've kind of pinched it and used it for alcoholism. Dr. Joy was a lecturer at the University of Massachusetts in Boston for 11 years, where she taught courses on privilege and oppression, feminist psychology, animal rights. She's given talks and training on 6 continents and in over 50 countries, and her work has been featured in major media outlets around the world. She's the 8th recipient of the Ahimsa Award, previously given to the Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela for her work on global nonviolence. And Dr. Joy is also the founding president of the charitable organization Beyond Carnism and the co-founder of Pro Veg International. You can learn more about her work at carnism.org. You can also learn more about her work at powerarchy.org. That's powerarchy.org. She's the most amazing, the most incredible human being you'll ever come across. And in this episode, we are going to put her in our Strive Inspiration series. We're going to talk about her life. You know, what was it like for Melanie growing up? Where did she develop and cultivate these ideas around powerarchy, about relationships, about carnism, you know? So we talk all about that. It's all about her life. Don't worry, we're going to get her on in the future to talk about powerarchies. We're going to get her in the future to talk about relationships. And we're also talking behind the scenes about trying to get her help to create some really fantastic and compelling work on relationships as part of the Strive sobriety system and 1000 Days Sober. So before I leave you in the capable hands of Melanie Joy, do me a big favor if you would. Could you please go to your podcast provider and do a rate and review? Give it 5 stars. Tell everyone how fantastic I am. And just one person today. Can you just tell one person today to listen to the Alcohol Addiction podcast? I'd really appreciate it. We're currently ranking nowhere. We're like 558th in Kenya. So come on. We need more people talking about this so people can get to hear about it, because I get emails from people saying that this experience is changing people's lives. And we need to make this journey bigger than ourselves. We need to make it bigger than ourselves. So get talking about it, please. Okay, I'm going to shut up and leave you in the capable hands of the wonderful, the beautiful, the amazing Melanie Joy. Welcome to the Strive podcast, Melanie Joy. How is life?
Hi, life is really good right now. Thank you.
And what part of the world are you in at the moment?
I'm in Berlin, where I've been living for the past 5.5 years. So I'm in Germany. It's getting dark earlier and earlier now.
Yeah, I'm in California, and it's just starting to get a little bit chilly in the nights. But I was in the UK last week. It was a lot colder, so I'm very grateful where I am. I've got to be honest. So you're in Berlin now, but where did you grow up? What part of the world did you grow up in and stumble into?
Well, I was born in New York, actually, and I lived in just outside of New York City for the first 7 years of my life. And then my parents got divorced. My mother moved with us up to Connecticut. And then I moved up to Boston when I was 18 to live with, I had family up there, and I was there for 30 years. So I really identify as a Bostonian. I mean, most of my life was in Boston, and I was living in Boston until I came here about 5.5 years ago to Germany.
How old was you when your parents got divorced, did you say?
I was 7.
7. I got divorced from my first wife when my son was 10. And I'm 44 now, he's 18. I just had a conversation with him before I come on the phone to you. I always worry that at some point he's going to be on the therapist's couch because of that kind of like time span. What was it like for you? How, being a 7-year-old, seeing your family split, what was that like?
Well, I mean, it wasn't easy. Fortunately, this was back in the early 70s. Fortunately, now there's a lot more awareness of how to, manage a divorce, and there are a lot more models out there for people to use. So it's a different thing. And divorces, usually it's not the problem for kids, it's how a divorce is managed that determines whether it's problematic or not. And it certainly wasn't an easy experience for me or my brother or my whole family. But again, if being able to, having life events that are challenging for you is also an opportunity for you to become, more fully you. And when I look back at my, some of the things that I lived through in my earlier years and even later years, I can see that the empathy that I have for people who are struggling in various types of situations is, I think, a lot deeper than it might have been if I had never known what it feels like to be struggling in these different ways.
Yeah, I was on the phone with my boy because he just had an apprenticeship interview, and obviously he's fresh out of school, so he doesn't have a lot of experience. But when they were asking him about how he's been challenged in life, he said, "I've been through a divorce." So in that respect, it kind of does help you to demonstrate some grit, some determination and resilience, some skills that you otherwise wouldn't have, I expect, Melanie.
It depends. It really just, like with any adversity in life, I mean, there are so many things that people can and do live through. And really, the most important thing is how we move through them. And most people, I believe that everybody does the best they can, with what they have. All of us, we just do the best we can. And we live through various experiences, various traumas, and we do our best to manage our relationship with those traumatic events. And even if you don't manage them when they're happening or shortly thereafter, every moment in your life is an opportunity to connect with yourself, to relate to yourself in a way that helps you to heal.
I love this book, by the way, Power Up. And you start out by talking about being 4 years of age and, starting to question the golden rule. We'll talk about the golden rule a little bit later on. I have a 3-year-old. And I often think to myself, wow, she's so in touch with her feelings and emotions. But that's really because we're teaching her that kind of stuff. It seems like you was as well at that age. Where did that come from? That almost like an awakened spirit or a soul or something that is like, you're looking at life and you're thinking, this isn't right. Like, where did that come from?
Well, I mean, most children we know feel empathy for other animals. Most children feel empathy. It's sort of, I think it came from the same place for all of us. We do know now that some people are born more sensitive than others, with just higher levels of sensitivity. Some people are born with, I don't want to say more of a capacity for empathy, but more of a tendency to empathize with others. I was one of these people. I was born very, very sensitive and highly empathic. But it's also, I don't know that this, kind of came from this empathic way of relating to the world came from somewhere, but rather it took some time for that to get buried by the culture that I grew up in. And,
Right.
I was very sensitive to, this experience that I had where I saw I killed a fish actually, but I had been sensitive to my father killing fish before that when he was fishing on the boat. It always bothered me to see animals or humans or non-humans in distress for sure. But it was, I think, over the years of this constant conditioning to eat animals, to relate to animals in a way where, we really just to disconnect so fully that we can put them in our mouths. I was so indoctrinated, like all of us, that natural sensitivity I had really got buried. I mean, I always was, if there was an animal who was one-to-one, facing me, like most people, I would, of course, feel a lot of empathy for that individual and want to treat them kindly. But like so many people, I learned to just turn that off when it came to my primary way of relating to them, which was 3 times a day at least, putting them in my mouth.
Yeah. I'm going through the same. Oh, Liza! Sorry. My daughter's just coming in the room. Liza, go to your mum, please. Completely throw me off track there now. Talk a little bit about the societal conditioning and how it affected you. I'm interested in also obviously talking about animals and eating animals and carnism, but societal conditioning in general. Because if you are very sensitive and you have this view of like how you want to be in the world, but the world wants you to be somewhere else, I'm really interested in how that affected you as you was growing up as a child.
I mean, I don't know that I had a view that was different when I wrote about the fish story that I wrote about in the book. What I remember looking back was just feeling numb and sad and guilty. I mean, once I was old enough to put words to those feelings, it was looking back. So the experience was, for people who aren't familiar with this, I caught a fish and I was 4 years old and my parents were, cheering me on and so excited and reeling the fish in with me. And I could not share in their excitement, and I didn't. I couldn't share their excitement, and I remember just being very confused in that moment and thinking, "What's wrong with me?" On some level, the 2 authority figures in my life are celebrating me and something that I had done, and I can't celebrate that. Not only can I not celebrate that, I actually feel bad about it. So I was having a completely opposite experience than they were, looking at the very same event. And so it wasn't, when I was 4 years old, I wasn't processing all this. I just knew that I was confused. Right. And that I felt weird and sad and disconnected. I guess that would be the word. I felt disconnected from my parents. I felt disconnected from myself. I want to say I felt disconnected from that fish who I was watching flop back and forth in, the bucket, suffocating to death that my father had thrown her in eventually. But I don't know that I felt disconnected. I know I certainly felt guilty at that time. It was later that I was able to put words to the experience. And I don't think that I'm, I believe that people, I don't know if I believe in this idea of specialness of people. Like I don't see myself as fundamentally different from anybody else in any appreciable way. We're all fundamentally different from each other in these various ways. I think the set of circumstances into which I was born and the biology that I came in with predisposed me for being very sensitive to issues of injustice and predisposed me to being very sensitive to cruelty and suffering, just or unjust. Cruelty is never just, but suffering, even suffering that has nothing to do with justice, with like natural disasters or something.
Was there, when I was in school, I lived in a very small village with like 8,000 people in it, right? And it was very polarized. You was either a nerd and you got beaten up by the cool kids, or you was a cool kid and you beat up the nerds. And you never wanted to be a nerd. Nobody wanted to be a nerd, right? So there was this status hierarchy going on. But there was also in the back of your mind, this isn't right. I don't want to behave or be like this, but I have to. And I imagine that everybody in the school went through that to a certain degree, and their experiences were very different, especially with different genders. What was your school life like in terms of, society wanting you to behave in this way in groups and stuff, and then you've got this kind of sensitive nature and you see the world maybe a little bit different? Like what was going on for you in school?
School was, we moved around a lot. So I never really stayed in one place for too long. So there were lots of different schools. And it was exactly as you say, there's this, it's terrible for what children have to live through in schools, basically. There's such a pecking order, such a hierarchy, and back in the day, this was in the 70s when I was growing up. So, bullying, I don't even know, bullying probably was a term back then, but certainly not one that anybody took seriously. I actually talk about this a little bit in my presentation on powerarchy when I was raised by a single mother, and we did not have, we certainly didn't have the kind of money that the vast majority of the other kids in the school, families in the school had. And so, I had to use stamps, basically kind of like food stamps, but for school food. I never had really new clothes or clothes that fit well. And so I was always perceived as the poor kid and taunted and teased and bullied largely for that reason. And so it really helped me to, I think, develop a lot of empathy for what it feels like to be in some ways powerless, to be the underdog, to be on the receiving end of that kind of unjust and bullying treatment. And also growing up as a woman in the 70s and then the 80s, it was just a constant of my daily reality, being a woman in a world where sexism was so rampant. It still is rampant, but it's nothing like it was back then. And I don't mean to say that it's not seriously problematic now, but, back in those days, men could touch you whenever, however they wanted to, within reason, say things, whatever they wanted to you. It was just the constant experience of not being taken seriously for being a woman, even when I, got my graduate degree, even then, and that was the 90s, I think, my first graduate degree. I still had to work harder to be taken seriously. And I still had to my experience as a woman was fundamentally different than the experience of the men that I knew in my life. And it was very apparent to me pretty much all the time, like most women back in that day.
I was on the opposite side of that spectrum, of course, because I was the guy probably abusing you verbally, stretching boundaries, not even knowing they exist, because I had a dad who talked and behaved like that to my mum, and it was just so unconscious. And nobody ever sat me down and spoke to me about the importance of respecting people, but respecting women. And when I had my boy, it's one of the things we talk about a lot. I obviously talk to him about respecting people, but I really, really emphasize about him respecting women. I remember our birds and the bees talk, when he was younger, and it was about respect. It's if these things happen, respect is super important, So I apologize to you and all the other women out there for the role that I played when I was a nipper in all of this.
Well, this is the thing. We're all so deeply socialized, and we don't recognize we're enmeshed in these systems of oppression, whether it's patriarchy or classism or racism or, speciesism or carnism or whatever. I've been white all my life, obviously. And, it wasn't until I was, a young adult in my 20s that I ever really thought critically about race, or even really thought about race in any substantial way. And I can look back, and there's no question, that I related to my whiteness, and particularly my white privilege, in a way that did not reflect, I don't want to say respect, but it did not reflect an understanding of, and respect for the experience of people for whom my white privilege was a problem, So I didn't see, but this is the thing about privilege. It's invisible to those who have it. And this is why it's so important to make a concerted effort to become aware of the privilege you have, because if you're not aware of it, you're almost inevitably going to abuse it in some way. Our privilege, which is the power bestowed upon us by systems that we had no role in actually creating, that existed far longer than we have, that we've been born into. This power that we have been unfairly granted, essentially, will cause us to violate the boundaries of others, to cross the boundaries of others without realizing what we're doing. And what this means is it causes us to invade their space in various ways. So whether it's verbal space, men tend to take up more verbal space to dominate conversations, and to not see this. And women often don't see it either when it's happening, because we're all socialized in the same system. Women are socialized to make ourselves smaller, and men are socialized to take up more space. And we just fit together like pieces in a puzzle, keeping the system of patriarchy alive that ultimately harms all of us. And so, we will, when we don't recognize the privilege that we have and the specific ways that it manifests and causes us to think, in a distorted fashion, essentially, will almost inevitably end up crossing the boundaries of others and treating them unjustly. So it's critically important that we learn about what privilege is, what power does to us, essentially, particularly the power that comes with privilege.
Feedback is so essential. I categorize myself as one of those guys who's always reading, self-educating, wanting to get better at. Like one of my goals is to be a world-class communicator, but it takes my wife to turn around and say to me, Lee, you take up too much space. You drain me. I find it so disrespectful. It's like I don't matter. It's like every time we talk, you're not listening to me because you want to talk. And I don't even know it's happening. And I feel so bad. And then it'll happen again. It'll happen again because, you have to put in the work and the practice to have conversations with people where you're behaving differently. And I think people read a lot of books, maybe go to some training courses, but it's the practice of being different, which I think is missing a lot, I think.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we can learn about something intellectually, and sometimes for some people in some circumstances, that is enough, right? Sometimes you actually learn something and you say, oh, I never thought of this before. And then it influences how you relate from there on out. Other times, not so much. And it's when these behaviors are so ingrained and when the system that you're a part of is set up to make it difficult for you to break these patterns. So systems of oppression like patriarchy, for example, they socialize, as I said, they socialize both men and women, people of all genders, to fit together so that women give up their space, have learned to give up their space to men, and men have learned to step into that space. So it's hard when one person tries to change the pattern of relating and the other person doesn't change. It can easily pull you back into the norm. And even when both people are aware, sometimes they keep defaulting because it takes time to break patterns. As you point out, it just takes time and effort.
This is why your books, Beyond Beliefs, and your new one that you're working on, Getting Relationship Right, are so important. Really so important. I want to ask you a question. I was at a dinner, a 2-year-old birthday party yesterday, and I was talking to a young lady there called Jazz. And she was on a conversation. She was saying like her husband's not there because he's like really busy. And then we got a little bit deeper. And she said to me something that I hear a lot, which is, well, I'm a woman, so I spend all my time giving to others. So I put everybody in front of me. And that's why I'm here right now. My husband's not. And I hear that a lot. And I have a question for you, I guess, is what do you think of that narrative? And how can you personalize that a little bit? What was it like for you growing up with that narrative?
Well, so gender plays a huge role in how we're socialized. There's no question. And study after study has demonstrated this. And gender is a piece of a much bigger whole. It's an important piece, but it's one piece. So women are socialized to be more relational. We are socialized to believe that it is our responsibility to cultivate and maintain relationships, and we are socialized to tend to focus on others' needs over our own. This doesn't mean there are not a lot of individual exceptions. This doesn't mean that in different cultures, women are less socialized to do this. But in general, we are. And so it's more likely that a woman is going to subvert her needs to support the needs of the man in her life. But individual personalities also play a role. Personality types are another kind of area of fascination for me. And you can see that certain people who, women, for example, who tend to have a more quote unquote dominant personality type with a man who tends to have a more passive personality type, you can see this get flipped. You can also see this dynamic flip when you have somebody, I don't know if you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs. I think you are.
I've done it. We talked
about it last time.
I tell you what, I did it a long time ago, and I would be completely different now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so with this, just put a caveat out there. There is a caveat where people do question the validity of the model. Rightly so, to some degree. I think it can be more nuanced, but the model itself is in many ways very sound. And one of the things that it looks at is how some people tend to be more, they call them feeling oriented, just more empathic, and that more focused on the needs and emotions of others, whereas other people tend to be less so. And there's no good or bad or right or wrong. We're just different. People who tend to be more feeling types, as they call them, are much more likely to be focused on others' needs than the reverse. So, and this crosses gender as well. So there are a lot of factors at play. You asked me another question with it. What is my experience?
It was to personalize it for you. So I'm making a huge assumption here, right? Obviously, which I shouldn't, but I think it's really important because the world lives on assumptions, a lot of the times. And I look at you and I think, wow, there's Melanie. She's a really strong, powerful woman. She's up there on stage and she's writing all these books and she's doing her bit to change the world in a real positive way. But so then I say to myself, so how did she escape this? Because sometimes when I listen to that person and she's saying to me, I give my power away to other people, there's a part of me going, don't do that. What are you doing that for? And then there's also a part of me saying, oh, that's a story. Can't we change the story? Can't we take power here? Can't we do something a little bit different? Can't we can't we do something different? So I guess my question is to you is, what did you do different? Or are you still doing that? Are you still giving that kind of power away? I'm really
power away. I mean, I was socialized to give my power away in certain ways, as I explained, and awareness goes a long way. And so, people are complex. All of us are a composite of lots of different personality, parts to our personalities. So you have. I'll answer your question in a minute, but I think this is relevant. So in this really fascinating cutting edge approach to psychology, which is called internal family systems, you may or may not heard of it, really the psyche is looked at as not one cohesive whole personality like you, Lee. It's not that you have one personality, but that you have lots of sub-personalities within you, and the way these sub-personalities intersect or interact create the whole that is you. And at any one point in time, or any given point in time, one of your so-called sub-personalities will be more dominant. And that's the part, right now, you're talking to me and you're in your interviewer mode. And it's probably a different you and a different part of you than will come out when you're interacting with your child or with your partner, or when you're in a really bad mood at the end of the day. So people are very, very complex. And so, of course, I was growing up in the 60s, the 70s, actually, I should say, and the 80s. And, I talked a little bit about one aspect of my experience growing up, which was, growing up in basically rampant sexism. But that was a piece of the whole that's me. So, and a part of me learned as a woman to basically put the needs of men first and to question the truth of my experience if I was having a conversation with a man who disagreed with me or my opinion or something. And I had to, but that wasn't all of me, but it was a lot of me, enough of me. And I had to learn to think differently like we all do. And so what switched for me, apart from, I think, having, I do tend to be quite relational and psychologically minded, and I always have been, and that's given me the advantage of being able to really reflect on my experiences from a very young age. Even as a child, I was doing a deep dive into philosophical analyses and issues. It was just the way my brain, it's where my brain would land. on these big questions. What's happening here? What's the meaning of this? What's happening inside of me? So that's helped me quite a bit, because I didn't and I don't, I've never really taken things on face value as much as I might have otherwise if I weren't always sort of questioning, trying to get beneath the surface of what's happening. So I think that was part of it, and that was an advantage. And of course, awareness raising. I took a women's studies course, and that changed everything for me. And that was a big part of why I chose to do the kind of work that I do, because it really helped me. It was one of many instances, but it helped me, having the information. Here's a name for it. It's patriarchy, sexism. This is how you're conditioned. You're conditioned to second guess your experience because this world that you've been born into has taught you to do that. But you really need to reclaim your power, and you really need to start to think differently and really make a commitment when you're questioning yourself to ask if you're questioning yourself because somebody with more power than you do is causing you to feel less secure in the truth of your experience.
When I gave up drinking in 2008, and the way that I did it, I didn't realize didn't realize until I read Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows, right? I couldn't put it into words or put it down there. Is basically, I believe that alcoholism is a powerarchy. And when I understood that in 2008, although I didn't have the words to understand it, so I'm talking about feelings, I guess, I was driven by a rage. I was so rageful that everyone around me was sucked into this. And of course, I couldn't communicate it to them because of what I call the death effect. Like they would agree with me, but they would then continue to drink, for example. So I call that like the death effect. It's like Rich Roll said once that he spoke at a vegan event, and someone came up to him and said, wow, that was amazing. It's like changed my life. And then he ordered a steak at the same time. So that kind of death effect. What was it that drove you to say to yourself, right, I'm going to make this a very, very important part of my life? I mean, we'll talk about life purpose and that in a minute, but it's certainly a significant part of your life, if not your purpose, to make a difference and to raise awareness. What drove you? It was anger for me. What was it for you?
I think it would be gratitude. And I've thought about this before. My first career was as a teacher. My master's degree is in education and teaching, with a focus in teaching and curriculum. And my original plan for my academic life actually was to get a PhD in education or an EDD and work on educational reform because I believe so deeply in the power of education to cultivate social transformation, how we're educated, and I believe so deeply in the need for education that really cultivates critical thinking and incorporates the subjects that actually matter most, in my opinion, in the world, like mindfulness and relationality and how to be a healthy, functional human being on this planet. And as Zoe Weil, who's a great, great educator, she runs the Institute for Humane Education, says to become a solutionary. How do you create, how do you use education? She's somebody you would probably love. How do you use education to create a generation of solutionaries? She has a great TEDx talk that I will send you the link to if you'd like.
Thank you. Yeah.
So yes, and I had an experience where I was given a second chance, put it that way, to do something with my life that I needed to do with my life, to live the kind of life that I wanted to live. And it was only because of people in my family, my aunt and uncle, who were kind of like my adopted parents. When I was older, I went to live with them, and they sort of became my family, and they gave me a second chance. They helped me out when I needed help in order to get through college, basically. I was the first person in my family to go to college. My parents did not, and it wasn't going to happen for me. And my brother actually did at the same time. He's 3 years younger than I am. So we both ended up going to college at the same time, but that wasn't necessarily going to be in the cards for me. Right. And my aunt and uncle intervened. And it was an act of grace on their part, and they wanted to give me a second chance to make something of my life, and they did. And because of them, I was able to get an education.
Are you talking financially, or are you talking that they became mentors and kind of like you was going down the wrong path and you was going to leave?
Both.
Right.
Yes, they intervened in my life financially and otherwise to shift the trajectory of where my path would have taken me. And because of that, everything changed. And I know, and I never forgot that. I know what it is to have a second chance, or maybe this was a third chance, but to have somebody say, I'm going to go to bat for you and give you an opportunity, and through education. And if I hadn't gotten the education that I got, I wouldn't have been able to develop. I mean, people can certainly develop critical thinking skills without formal education. There's no question about it. In fact, some people could argue that you're more likely to develop good critical thinking skills without formal education, because our education system doesn't always cultivate critical thinking skills. Sometimes it does the opposite. But it certainly is a way. It is a way forward for a lot of people. And that was what made me want to become an educator, and what drove me to want to give to people what had been given to me, which was the power that comes with education, the power that comes with I was very fortunate. I went to Harvard Extension for my undergraduate degree, which is Harvard's continuing education. So my parents didn't pay for my education. There was no education fund. It was up to me. And my aunt and uncle gave me what I needed to start, but there was no way I could pay for my own education. I was a waitress and a babysitter. So Harvard Extension is Harvard's continuing education. And basically you have to take 3 courses that are taught by Harvard professors in their evening school. And if you pass them with a B+ or higher, then you can apply to actually get into the continuing ed program, which I did. And so I was able to do that. And I got an incredible a really, really great education. And in that process, I took courses in women's studies, and I took courses on philosophy, and it just opened up. I had always been a very curious person, and, always doing deep dives into research and issues that I was interested in. But this education really taught me how to think, really formally think. It taught me how to be logical. It taught me how to think differently. It helped me get a job that paid an almost decent wage. And because of that, I never wanted, I have a very sensitive part of me for people who do not have the opportunity to get an education if they want an education. And so that drove me, and that has continued to drive me. I shifted from education into psychology/education for other reasons, but I think that's, gratitude and wanting to give back what was given to me is a huge driver.
When you're going through your education and you're almost like having a Neo-like matrix download and all this information, it's like flooding into your head. I'm thinking about Joseph Campbell's story archetype, where, the hero goes from this ordinary world to a special world and then returns to the ordinary world a changed person. And for me, my ordinary world was Ogmore Vale, 8,000 people, small mentality, worked on the railway, never even questioned why I was working there. And then this special world was I'm helping people to quit alcohol. And the leap from that ordinary world to the special world was Grand Canyon-like. It was immense. Like, how am I going to raise my family, quitting my job type of thing? I'm very interested in, while you're being educated, what's going through your head in terms of how am I going to turn this into something so A, I can make the difference in the world that I want to make, and B, I'm going to make money so I can continue to do what I love to do, which is make a difference in the world. What was going through your head, and how did you get from your ordinary world to your special world?
I don't know if it was, I don't know that the world was ever that ordinary, actually. That said, how did I make the leap? It was a long process. So I had to work my whole way through school. I eventually started taking out more and more loans so that I could go to school, take a lot more courses at once. But it was a lot. I was working at one point, I was working 3 jobs and going to school. So there wasn't a whole lot of time during that process for thinking about the way that I would apply it. The original plan always for me was that I was going to be some sort of an artist. That was what my role was in my family. It was music and art. And and that I was destined, the plan was that I would get to college if I went to college on a music scholarship, and music would be my thing. So for a while through the first part of my college years, and I had taken time off before. I didn't go straight from high school into college. I took a chunk of, it was like 5 years, I think, where I wasn't, I was just working. So it was partway through. I mean, I started out, I really wanted to understand things. I always knew I wanted to make the world a better place. There was no question. I mean, that was never a question in my mind. It was a question of how. The question was which group am I going to focus on? I was exquisitely sensitized to injustices. Part of that is because part of my family is very diverse. Part of my family, my mother and my aunt and her family, they're very progressive and politically oriented. So my aunt she actually did become a doctor. She was a doctor, a pediatrician, and she worked for low-income, non-English Spanish-speaking people in Boston. And she was definitely a role model for me in that way. My mother was also very kind of politically progressive. She hadn't gone to college, but she wasn't really pushing me to go to college or anything, but politically progressive. So I think I had an understanding of progressive social issues, and I was very sensitized to injustice. The question in my mind was, do I want to work for human rights or do I want to work for animal rights? And this was before I even knew about slaughterhouses and animal exploitation. It was really like, I want to make a difference in the world, should it be animals or humans. It was that kind of generalized. But I didn't know how. And when I was in college as an undergrad, I started out as a major in comparative religious ethics because, again, it was all about the deep dive and wanting to get to the heart of wanting to really understand on the deepest level possible, essentially like what it's all about. If I could figure out what it's all about, maybe I could start figuring out how to make it a little bit better. And that was not very practical. So I majored in foreign languages, which was also not very practical. But I knew that my major was not, partway through, probably 2/3 of the way or halfway through my college education, I realized that my major was not going to actually make a big difference in what I ended up doing with my life, because you still have to get a master's degree in something. So I don't know. And I ended up getting a job as a teacher by mistake. I was an English teacher teaching an ESL course, and it was a fit. It was just where I was meant to be. I was in the front of a classroom. I had never done it before. I was like in my early 20s. I don't remember how old I was, but it was just like that was where it was just where I was meant to be. And there was no question in my mind. And it was and one thing I could say is I was in flow.
Right.
That's where my flow moments were happening, besides the art that I had done. And so it was a combination of that, and my aunt and uncle having let me go to school and getting an education, and then being an educator for people who might not otherwise have the opportunity to do with their lives what they wanted to, that made me say, oh my God, education, I have to be, there's just no way I'm not going to be an educator. And so that was really the drive. But I shifted from education eventually into psychology because I became aware that I would be able to do more. At this point, I had gotten involved in animal rights and much more involved in social justice. And I felt like this incredible urgency to make a difference. And I realized that I could do more through psychology than I could through education.
When you were talking about being up in front of the classroom and that state of flow, and the other thing that came up for me was a lot of great resilience and determination to really work your ass off to make something happen, Now, our audience is not going to be 20-year-olds, in that same boat. How our audience is actually going to be 40-plus-year-old women who, although they're not in that boat, they're in a very similar boat. They're married to a bloke who doesn't see them, who doesn't hear them, who doesn't listen to them. It's like they don't exist. He doesn't do anything to take him anywhere. He's just sat there drinking beer and they don't. And this is why your book, Beyond Beliefs, is so important to these people. But they're kind of stuck. Their dreams are just dreams and they don't really know how to break free. So given what you learned and what you went through in order for you to be a success, what kind of advice would you give to people who are still stuck?
I mean, first of all, success is a very relative term, right? So success is whatever, I think to me, what is successful, is a life that one feels good about living, whatever that looks like, really feels good about living in their heart. So I don't believe in this, Steve Jobs is some great success, for example, because he's on stage or whatever. So I think, one thing is just really thinking about for yourself, what is success? Like, what makes you feel? What, if you could imagine, and this is a good thought experiment for people who feel stuck, and who want to be successful, what does success mean to you in the first place? Like, that's the first question. And one way to get at that is to ask yourself, if you could snap your fingers right now, and let's just take career or job as one aspect, it's one major aspect of life. If you could snap your fingers right now and be anything that you wanted to be, let's just take money out of the picture. Let's take everything out of the picture just for the thought experiment. What would it be? If you woke up tomorrow, what would you be doing for your work? And then from there, then you start asking yourself, well, how realistic is this for me? How might I do this? There are so many different, well, let me back up. For many people, they say to themselves, like, I'm too old now to really pursue what I would want to do. I finished my PhD when I was in my 30s, actually, and didn't really start my career the career as it is today until I was in my 30s. And I had this feeling in the back of my head, oh my God, I'm too old, which I've heard so many people say. And frankly, my 22-year-old students used to complain to me that they were too old to start doing things. So, a lot of people do feel this way.
Yeah.
And so one thing to do is also just notice that voice in your head. If it says I'm too old, why are you saying this? When you say I'm too old, what is it? Is it because you feel like you don't have the energy? Like, what does it mean to be too old? And if you really think about it, like when I was doing my PhD and I thought, oh my God, I'm too old, I stepped back and I said, well, too old. So what does it look like? How many years will it take me to get this PhD? And I had already gotten through the master a lot, 1.5 masters. So it was 3 years. So I thought, 3 years from today, how old am I going to be? How much of my life might still be stretched ahead of me? You really have to take this bird's eye view, because humans tend to really be myopic. We tend to just see what's right in front of us, which is determined by how we're feeling in the moment, which might be a little scared or a little bit overwhelmed. So ask yourself, what would success be like for me? What would make me feel? And that's a big abstract question. And then on a career level, what could I imagine doing? And let's say, oh, I want to be a doctor, or something that's tons of education and super expensive, at least in the United States. Is it really possible? It may well be. A lot of things are more possible than they seem when you actually give yourself permission to imagine them. But if it's not, if it's really out of your, ability to achieve this particular goal, then you can ask yourself, well, okay, if my big dream is to be a doctor, and that just doesn't seem reasonable because I'm raising kids right now, and there's just no way I can take, even if I do night classes, whatever it may be. If you've looked into all of the alternative ways to achieve this goal, then you can ask yourself, well, why do I want to be a doctor? Because what the answer to that question might help you recognize there are other ways to feel fulfilled. And, to achieve that sense of living your truth or living your purpose. Well, I want to be a doctor because I love helping people. Okay, well, there are a gazillion other ways to help people, right? Or I want to be a doctor because I'm fascinated by science. Well, there are lots of other things that are scientific, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The one thing that I would recommend the most of all for anybody, regardless of what question they're asking, I guess, but particularly if you're in a position where you're really stuck, is to really commit to developing your inner observer so that you can start to notice the voice in your head that's talking to you about your stuckness itself. So a lot of the times, the biggest obstacle for most people, very, very often, the biggest obstacle is the voice in our heads that is judging us for being stuck in the first place, that is judging us for trying to get unstuck, feeling like we don't have a right to be thinking that way and asking ourselves these questions. If you can just make a habit of pausing You can develop this inner observer in a lot of ways. One thing you can do is just set an alarm to go off several times throughout the day and just pause and notice the dialogue in your head. Just notice it. Your inner observer is the part of you that's always there, that's always been there, and that always will be there. You don't have to do anything to create it because it already exists. The only thing you have to do is to step back to give it the opportunity to do what it's meant to do, which is to observe for you with compassion. This is your inner compassionate witness. And you are the expert on you. You have so much knowledge about yourself. You've been living in your own body and your own brain for many, many years. Nobody knows you better than you do. So when you develop this inner observer, you give this part of yourself that is objective, that's witnessing, that's non-judgmental. This is not the voice in your head that's saying things to you that have value judgments in them, either positive or negative. Oh, great job. Oh, you screwed that one up again, didn't you? This is simply the part of you that's watching with compassion and without judgment. And when people have a strong inner observer, which anybody can have, because your inner observer is like a muscle, the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets, and eventually it's there with you wherever you go in a very present way. People who have a strong inner observer are people who are much less likely to get stuck and certainly much less likely to stay stuck because they have access to important information about what they need in order to feel good about their lives. And they get out of their own way, basically. So that's the one thing that I would recommend most for anybody. And I'm also a firm believer in obstacle reduction. I think, when you're stuck, apart from just developing your inner observer, one thing you can really commit to doing is to ask yourself, what is it that's in your way? Instead of, like, most of us value willpower, I think a lot too highly. I just need to try harder. We want to start to work out regularly. So we set our alarm for 6:00 so we can go to the gym before work and never do it because we're sleeping and we don't want to get up. Well, you're not a morning person. That's an obstacle. What's the obstacle to you getting to the gym? Well, doing it when you're tired. Okay, then try to go to the gym in the evening. So identify the obstacles and try to reduce them rather than just trying to push yourself harder to get unstuck, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. When the way that we help people to stop drinking alcohol and not crave alcohol is to see the belief system. And the way that we help people see the belief system is to take away the value that alcohol has. So if we take away the value, it has no desire. And the way that we do that is to piecemeal it. So if someone says, for example, wow, I love drinking red wine with my Wagyu steak or whatever, and that's why I can't stop drinking alcohol because I have tremendous value in it. That's an obstacle. We present it as an obstacle, and then we question them and get them thinking about, well, am I really drinking alcohol because it tastes nice? And then they realize that if that was the only reason that they were drinking alcohol, is not the reason, because they would still be addicted. So they kind of cross it. It's an obstacle and they cross it off a list. And now suddenly alcoholism becomes that little bit smaller. And then we keep going until we get to the one obstacle. So there's always like the fundamental reason that people drink, which we teach is being alcoholism as this invisible, violent, dominant belief system. Sound familiar? And then a really important kind of secondary reason, like I had trauma when I was younger, or I don't fit in, or I don't have any self-worth or whatever. So I totally get that. If we changed the word success to fulfillment, do things change then on how you advise someone? Because the very first guest on Strive podcast was Bernadette Jiwa. And when I asked her I used success instead of fulfillment, and Bernadette said, hey, I was like a mum, like into my mid 30s, and I loved every minute of it. I loved it. Like I would never have exchanged that for anything. That was my life. So that now is fulfillment. And of course, at Strive, we don't want just to help people quit alcohol. We want them to live a fulfilled life. So that's, I think, is lacking in a lot of people who are drinking. Does things change if I propose that question to you about fulfillment?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually describing fulfillment rather than success, because success, as I said, it's not, it's not being on a stage. You can be quote unquote successful financially, as people might say, but you're not fulfilled. You're not happy. Yeah. I mean, I personally don't even use the word in my own vocabulary because I don't find it I find it useful in terms of describing whether you've achieved a goal or not. We've been successful in achieving this goal, but to describe a person's, experience as successful I think it's a little bit tricky because it's a loaded word, but fulfillment works much better to me.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm glad. One of the things that we teach people at Strive, once we've helped them to become someone who doesn't drink alcohol, or what we call a striver, is theme. So what tends to happen sometimes is they'll stop drinking alcohol and then this white space appears in front of them. So what I mean by that is they have a lot more time on their hands, Melanie, because they're not drinking and they're not thinking about drinking and all that kind of stuff, or recovering from drinking. But also they have white space in their mind because they develop a more razor sharp clarity and they start philosophizing, and that observer mind and that questioning mind switches on. And if people don't fill that with something very quickly, the feedback that I get through my work is, oh, this is boring. Like, I don't like this alcohol-free life because everybody else is like enjoying themselves, going out drinking, et cetera, and I'm not really doing anything. So we try to say, okay, well, let's have a look at what choose a theme. Let's choose a theme in your life, and it can change as we go along, but let's choose something that we really want to do. Like you said earlier on, maybe someone wants to be a doctor. When we find out that what they want to do is actually just help people. So what is your views on theme, which is essentially meaning and purpose? You get a lot of self-help books that said everybody on this earth has a meaning and purpose. How important do you think it is to have a meaning purpose? What's your views around it, and how does that relate to you?
Most people, I believe, from what I understand anyway, that most people, do need to feel like their life has some meaning and purpose. And I think that's pretty much a given. But what it is for each person is very, it changes from person to person. Most people do need to feel like they're living a moral life, essentially. One thing that we do know through research is that the core moral values of compassion and justice tend to be shared across cultures. Like, these are foundational moral values, and that most people need to feel that they're living a life that reflects, to a significant enough degree anyway, compassion and justice. Justice is fairness and compassion is caring. So, you ask most people, they're not going to say, I'm not a fair person and I'm not a caring person. They may not act in ways that are fair or caring, but they certainly want to think of themselves that way. And so I would say that I believe that all of us, or maybe not all of us, but the vast majority of people, myself included, seek to feel that we are living in alignment with these values, and that gives our lives meaning. Some people, I think, are more, from my observations, from my understanding as a psychologist, I should say, also are more purpose-driven than others. They're more, actively thinking about purpose. Why am I here? What am I doing? Other people, it's not on their mind all that much, that people have different personal values. We have these kind of core universal values of compassion and justice, but then there are a lot of personal values that differ. For some people, enjoying life and savoring life, carpe diem is such a strong value that, purpose is secondary to them, or maybe not even, on their radar so much. For me, purpose is a very strong driver. For sure. I've always been that way. And I also feel that it's a privilege. I'm very lucky because there's also many people for whom purpose is a core value, personal value, and yet they haven't been able to connect with what the purpose is for them. Mm-hmm. And when I was advising students, when I was teaching at university for a number of years, one of the things that they really struggled with and wanted to talk to me about the most was their purpose. What am I going to do? And it's, part of the problem is that in the US and in many places in the world, the education system is just not set up to help people discover their purpose. And yet you're expected to decide what you're going to do with the rest of your life when you're like 22, right? Yeah. So they're freaking out because they're going like, oh my God, I'm about to graduate from college and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I haven't found my purpose. And we do live in a world that makes it hard for many of us to really connect with our purpose because we live in a world that basically socializes us to be very fragmented in our thinking and very disconnected from ourselves and very focused on extraneous, very superficial things. We're so deeply socialized to be focused on what we're buying next and like who we're going to impress that we don't have the bandwidth to look within. And so I think it's a privilege to have found your purpose, and for people who feel that they want to find a purpose, that they are like actually that this is a core value for them, but they haven't really connected with it yet. One of the things I used to ask my students to help them connect with what their purpose might be is to have them ask themselves a question, which is not what makes me feel good, but what makes me feel good about myself. What makes me feel good about myself? That's a really good way to find your purpose. And again, you need to activate your inner observer to be able to tune into the conversation inside of yourself that you may be having. But it's a good guiding question for purpose.
Well, Melanie, we've reached the top of the hour. I think that's a really great place. We started at the beginning talking about societal conditioning, and we ended up at the end a little bit there on the kind of same thing, because, like a lot of people at Strive, their purpose or those questions they were asking when they're 20 kind of been buried underneath all this societal conditioning, and then another 45 and all the excuses and stuff come out. So we'll leave it there. I just want to personally thank you for the work that you're doing. I know that you started out early in life choosing humans or animals, and you went down the animal route, and now you're kind of like encompassing everything. And I really like that. And I want to say that I hope that I impact the lives of millions of people when it comes to alcoholism. And if I do that, you will be a major part of that. Your teachings around your philosophies on life and how hierarchies work have really helped me to help a lot of people, because I'm not a natural teacher. So I thank you for all that debt you incurred, all that grit and determination, because I think what is most powerful about you, Melanie, I don't know if you're aware of this, you probably are, you're a very smart cookie, is the impact that you have on leaders, and then the impact that those leaders are going to have on big, massive groups of people. You have an incredible way of touching leaders, I think, personally. So thank you for that. Keep up the good work.
Thank you for that. That's very touching to hear. Thank you for that feedback and for everything that you're doing and the way that you're, having conversations that bring so many different issues together, because they all come from the same foundation. And it's not easy to be able to have conversations that are touching on all of these different issues at the same time and keeping them cohesive as well. So well done.
Thank you, Melanie. You go and have your dinner, and I'll catch you again.
Thank you, Lee. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. And before you bugger off and go listen to someone more important than me, like Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan, I've got a few things to tell you about. First and foremost, if you really like the show, please go to your podcast platform, rate and review it. Give it a 5-star review. Tell everyone how great I am. I'll be really, really appreciative. Secondly, if you want to learn more about the work that we're doing here at 1000dayssober.com, then head to that website, 1000dayssober.com. You can learn how to get involved in this amazing project, to be someone who doesn't drink alcohol for 1000 days and beyond, okay? Get over there, get involved. We will provide you with a tremendous support system and world-class workshop experience called the Strive Sobriety System, okay? It's catered to hit you at all stages of this sobriety journey. So if you're like contemplating whether or not it's right for you to stop drinking, don't worry, we've got your back. We'll hit you on that. If you've been stopped drinking for now 7 days, 8 days, and you want to make an even bigger inroads, we've got you. If you've actually stopped drinking for 3-4 years, but you still want to be amongst a community of people who don't drink alcohol and you want to enrich your life and live a fulfilled life, we've got your back as well. So get over to www.1000dayssober.com, okay, and join our Strive support system. It is amazing. You will love it. If you want to follow us on social, you can find us at 1000dayssober.com on Instagram and 1000dayssober.com at YouTube, where you can watch all of these podcasts in the flesh rather than just listening to them. Without further ado, I'm going to shut the hell up and leave you in the capable hands of yourself. Thanks for listening.